Greetings, everybody. Learning is a hobby here. I want to go over my summary for Chapter 2 in Peter Smith's An Introduction to Formal Logic, um, which is one of the books that I've been using for my series on introductory logic. So I'll go over my summary for Chapter 2, as well as actually the solution set for the solution to the exercise set in Chapter 2 as well. I'm not going to make a video on the solutions to the exercise set for Chapter 1 because the problems there are relatively straightforward. So I'll let you guys work, handle take a look at those and try them yourself. But just so you're aware, if you haven't seen the first video, Peter Smith has on his website the solutions to all the exercises in the book. I'll put a link to his website down below, as well as a link to the book if you want to pick it up, physical copy, which you don't have to do because he offers it for free on the website if you prefer to do that. So let me bring up my notes and we'll go over the everything there. All right. Just before I start, I'm going to go over the my summary here in sort of an abbreviated way because there's a lot of overlap here with the other videos that I've made so far in the other books. So, a lot of this should look familiar, but Smith's way of, um, teaching the subject, has a slightly different flavor than the other books, and each author does it slightly differently. So I want to get each author's perspective on the topics. So here, chapter 2 starts on a more carefully defined version of validity. An inference step is valid if and only if there is no possible situation in which its premises would be true and its conclusion false. Equivalently, in such a case, we will say that the inference's premises entail its conclusion. And Smith says that this definition characterizes what is often called the classical concept of validity. I'm going to skip this example here. It's just an example of an inductive argument. So we've already said that deductively valid arguments are not the only form of good reasoning. But he gives an example here of an argument that would be better classified as inductive. But I do want to make this note here that the author talks about. So our definition should be read: a deductively valid inference is one where it is not possible, even the most generously inclusive sense, roughly, it is not even coherently conceivable that the inference's premises are true and its conclusion false. Right, and then we move on to the definition of necessity here. It is necessary, or necessary truth. It is necessarily true that C here is some, proposition, if and only if it is true that C in every possible situation, in our most inclusive sense of possible. All right, and then we use that to get another slightly more formal, I guess, definition of validity. Um, formulated in terms of necessity. An inference step is valid if and only if it is necessary in the strongest sense. That is, if the inference's premises are true, so is its conclusion. For short, valid inferences are necessarily truth-preserving. All right, and then we get to consistency and equivalence, which is, again, topics that we've already seen in other videos. We need a term for the kind of thing that can feature as a premise or a conclusion in an argument. Let's use the traditional, term proposition. For the moment, we just assume that propositions can sensibly be said to be true or false in various situations. I guess we'll look more into propositions later on, the philosophical, definition of propositions later on. One or more propositions are jointly inconsistent if and only if there's no possible situation in which these propositions are all true together. And similarly, one or more propositions are jointly consistent if and only if there is a possible situation in which they are all true. Both times mean possible in the weakest, most inclusive sense, as we've mentioned already. I'm going to skip over this example, like I said, because I don't want to, be too redundant with the material. An inference step is valid if and only if its premises taken together with the denial of the conclusion are inconsistent. This means that when we develop logical theory, it matters little whether we take the notion of validity or the notion of consistency as fundamental. So I guess we could, start from either validity, or we can start from the notion of consistency and get to the same place eventually. Two propositions are equivalent if and only if they are true in exactly the same possible situations. And this is closely tied to the notion of valid inference. The propositions A and B are equivalent if and only if A entails B and B entails A. And then we prove that here. So the Smith asks why, and then here's a proof. Let A, B be equivalent. Then if A is true, so is B. So A entails B, and similarly, B entails A is shown in the similar way. Conversely, suppose A entails B and B entails A, then A true implies B true, and if B true implies A is true, therefore A and B are true in exactly the same situations, so A is equivalent to B. And so that's just a little proof. Basically, just relies on definitions. Next, we have the next section is titled Validity, Truth, and the Invalidity Principle. So to assess whether an inference step is deductively valid, it is usually not enough to look at what is the case in the actual world. We also need to consider alternative possible worlds. So this is what he means by, in the sort of weakest sense, right? Or the strongest sense, when we talk about possibility. So he has an example here. Should I go over the proposition? I guess I will, because I'm going to read the little paragraph underneath it. So this is an example. We'll call this argument B in this section. 1, no Welshman is a great poet. 2, Shakespeare's a Welshman. So 3, Shakespeare's not a great poet. The propositions here are all false in the actual world, but that doesn't settle whether the premises of B entail its conclusion. In fact, the inference step here is valid. So again, this is a topic that we've explored already. You can have a valid argument with a false conclusion if at least one of the premises are false, right? The only situation that you're not allowed to have is for a valid inference step is all true premises and a false conclusion. I'll skip over these examples here. Again, if you want to see, read all the details here, you can either look at the copy of Smith's book, or I have, my notes I always post on the Patreon page if you want to download them. So here's a note. Validity is only a matter of internal cogency. Someone who believes D3 on the basis of D1 and D2, he's talking about the previous argument, would be using a reliable form of inference, but they would be arriving at a true conclusion by sheer luck. Maybe I should talk about that argument here. This is argument D that he's referring to. No one whose middle name is William is a Democrat. George W. Bush's middle name is William, which it isn't if you don't know, it's Walker. They're talking about President Bush here, George W. Bush. So 3, George W. Bush is not a Democrat. So he says someone who believes D3 on the basis of D1, D2 would be using a reliable form of inference, but they would not be arriving at a true conclusion. Sorry, they would be arriving at a true conclusion by sheer luck. Aristotle noted the point, discussing valid arguments with false premises. He remarks that the conclusion may yet be correct, but quote unquote, only in respect to the fact, not to the reason. All right, and then here we have the invalidity principle. An inference step with actually true premises and an actually false conclusion must be invalid. All right, so that should seem reasonable. A valid inference step can have any combination of true or false premises and conclusion, with one exception that like I said before, it cannot have all true premises and a false conclusion. And then here, just to reiterate, deductive validity is about necessary preservation of truth. An invalid inference step can have any combination of true or false premises and conclusion, which we've seen in some other videos that I posted already as well. So I'll skip this just because there's no point in going over that again. Inferences and arguments. We have spoken of inference steps in arguments as being valid or invalid. It's more common to describe arguments as being valid. sorry, it's more common to describe arguments as being valid or invalid. This can mislead beginners. To say that a one-step argument is valid in our sense is only to commend the cogency of the inferential move between premises and conclusion. It's only to say that the conclusion really does follow from the premises. Again, I'll skip over this example argument here. Since the inference step, here's referring to the example. I'll skip that. A one-step argument is valid if and only if the inference step from the premises to the conclusion is valid. A one-step argument is sound if and only if it has all true premises and the inference step from those premises to the conclusion is valid. Right. When deploying deductive arguments, we typically want our arguments to be sound, but not always. Sometimes we want to argue compellingly from premises we don't believe to be true at all. Again, this is something that we do when we argue all the time. Argue in the formal sense, not in the colloquial sense. For example, to deduce something obviously false so that the disputant will come to agree with us that the premises aren't all true. Sometimes we even want to argue from sometimes we even want to argue from premises that are inconsistent in order to bring out their inconsistency. Note 3 easy consequences of our definition of soundness. 1, any sound argument has a true conclusion. 2, no pair of sound arguments can have conclusions inconsistent with each other. And 3, no sound argument has inconsistent premises. Why? For the following reasons. So here he gives reasons for those 3 things. So 1 prime, a sound argument starts from true premises and involves a necessary truth-preserving inference move, so it must end up with a true conclusion. 2 prime, since a pair of sound arguments will have a pair of true conclusions, this means that the conclusions are true together. Then, of course, they can be true. This means that the conclusions are true together. Then, of course, they can be true together. If they can be true together, then the conclusions are consistent with each other. Right? 3 prime, since inconsistent premises cannot all be true together, an argument starting from those premises cannot satisfy the first of the conditions for being sound. If we replace sound by valid in 1 and 3, the claims become false. All right, what about arguments where there are intermediate inference steps? When are they deductively cogent? As a first shot, we'll say that such extended arguments, excuse me, we'll say that such extended arguments are valid when each inference step along the way is valid. We will see in section 4.4 that more needs to be said, however. Right, then the next section is titled Valid versus True. The propositions that occur in arguments of premises and conclusions are assessed for truth or falsity, whereas inference steps in arguments are assessed for validity or invalidity. Despite the common misuse of the terms, resolve never again to say that a premise or conclusion or other proposition is valid when you mean it's true, and never again say that an argument is true when you mean that it is valid or sound. Right. I had to continue to another set of lecture notes here to finish up chapter 2. So, what is the use of deduction? As we noted before, deductively valid inferences are not the only acceptable inferences. There is inductive reasoning, which is reasoning about the future on the basis of the past, and there is abductive reasoning, inference to the best explanation. If we have other good forms of reasoning, just how interesting or important is deductive reasoning? Well, for example, the hypothetico-deductive method of science highlights the role of deductive reasoning from theory to predictions. From patterns in data or by models of underlying processes or by analogies with other phenomena, etc., we conjecture that a certain theory is true. Then we use the theory together with assumptions about initial conditions, etc., to deduce a range of testable predictions. We want to know about our theory. We want to know what our theory deductively entails. Then we test our predictions. Then we either must reject the theory or if our predictions are false. We must reject the theory if our predictions are false, or else refine our hypotheses to accommodate the new data. This is called falsification, right? What goes for science goes for rational inquiry more generally. So this is sometimes, when we're thinking through a situation in our lives, then, this type of reasoning, I'm sure you're familiar, sometimes do ourselves. Okay, and then lastly, in chapter two, he has this little note at the end, an illuminating circle. Note that we first defined validity in terms of what is possible. We then further elucidated this relevant weak notion of possibility in terms of what is coherently conceivable. A minimal condition for coherently conceivable would seem to be a story about the conceived situation, must not involve some hidden self-contradiction, which presumably is to be understood as meaning we cannot validly deduce a contradiction from the story. So it seems that we have defined deductive validity in a way that needs to be explained, at least in part, by invoking the notion of a valid deduction. This kind of circularity is often unavoidable when we are trying to elucidate some really fundamental web of concepts. Often the best we can do is start with a rough partial grasp of various ideas and then aim to draw out relationships and make distinctions, clarifying and sharpening ideas. So going round, hopefully, in an illuminating circle rather than a vicious circle, I suppose. All right, we'll later be giving sharp technical definitions of notions of validity for various special cases of argument, definitions which do not directly invoke troublesome notions of necessity slash possibility. Okay, and then we get to the exercise set. So like I said, I'll do my solutions to the exercise set here as well, just because this chapter is kind of short. Okay, let's see. Question number A, which of the following claims are true and which are false? Explain why the true claims hold good and give counterexamples to the false claims. Like I said at the beginning, I'll post a link to Smith's website down below if you want to see his solutions, because he does post the solutions as PDF files for all of the problems in the book. All right. Number one, the premises and conclusion of an invalid argument must together be inconsistent. All right, this is false, and I give a counter example here. Cheese is made from milk, therefore the moon is a satellite of the Earth. So the conclusion here is, sorry, can I scroll up here? So here, the conclusion is true. The um, uh, sorry, the premise is it's true. Um, so here the statement, the premises and conclusion of an invalid argument must together be inconsistent, um, is not true, right? Because my argument here is not valid, but still you have a consistent set of sentences. Right. Number two, if an argument has false premises and a true conclusion, then the truth of the conclusion can't really be owed to the premises. So the argument cannot really be valid. Again, this is false. And I give a counterexample. All humans are reptiles. All snakes are human. Therefore, all snakes are reptiles. Right. So when it's false, I give a counterexample to show, why it's false. And if it's true, then I'll give a reason why it's true. Number three, any inference with actually true premises and a true conclusion is truth preserving and so valid. Here's the solution. This is false. And again, I just make reference again to the counterexample I gave in example number one, or exercise number one. Right. Four, you can make a valid argument invalid by adding extra premises. This is false. No matter what premise is added to a valid argument, whether true, false, or one that makes the premises inconsistent, does not allow all the premises to be true, but the conclusion false. That's why it's false. I'm sorry for the clearing my throat so much. I don't know why my throat is feeling a bit scratchy. So number five, you can make a sound argument unsound by adding extra premises. This is true. Just add a premise that is logically false. Right. Six, you can make an invalid argument valid by adding extra premises. This is also true. Add premises that logically entail the conclusion. For example, we can simply add the conclusion as a premises. Sorry, as a premise. All right, number seven. If some propositions are consistent with each other, then adding a further true proposition to them can't make them inconsistent. This is false, and I have a counterexample here. And maybe I'm showing my age here, but horses are not mammals. Mr. Ed is a horse. That's a consistent set of statements, but horses are not mammals. Mr. Ed is a horse. Mr. Ed is a mammal is inconsistent, even though the third sentence is true. All right, number eight, if some propositions are jointly inconsistent, then whatever propositions we add to them, the resulting propositions will still be jointly inconsistent. This is also a true statement. If a set of propositions is inconsistent, then there's no situation where they are all true at the same time, even if we add any proposition to the set. Number 9, if some propositions are jointly consistent, then their denials are jointly inconsistent. This is false. And I provide a counterexample here. Alex works at the Natural History Museum. Pepsi Cola is brown. Right. Number 10, if some propositions are jointly inconsistent, then we can pick any one of them and validly infer that it is false from the remaining propositions as premises. So this is true. So here's the reason why that I'm giving. Let the set A1 through AN be a set of jointly inconsistent sentences. Then take AJ. Then this here, if I define the set S to be the set of um, all of the sentences AI, where I goes from 1 to N, but not I, not J, is either consistent or inconsistent. If S is inconsistent, then the proposition AJ is false can be validly inferred from S. If S is consistent, then if all the propositions in S are true, AI must be false. Sorry, AJ must be false. So the proposition AJ is false is true, and therefore it can be validly inferred that AJ is false. Okay, and then there's only 2 questions in this exercise set, but there's multiple parts. So here, this is question B. Show that and all of these proofs that I'm going to do here for you kind of just follow from definitions, so they're relatively easy. But anyway, let's look at them. Number 1, if A entails C and C is equivalent to C prime, then A entails C prime. So here's my proof. Let A be true, then C is true. Since A entails C, then C prime is true since C and C prime are equivalent. Therefore, if A is true, then C prime is true, so A entails C prime, and that shows that it follows, right? Number 2, if A entails C and A is equivalent to A prime, then A prime entails C. Here's my proof. Let A prime be true, then A is true since A and A prime are equivalent. Since A is true, C is true since A entails C. Therefore, if A prime is true, C is true. Therefore, A prime entails C. Right? Number 3, if A and B entail C and A is equivalent to A prime, then A prime and B entail C. Right, and here's my proof. Let A prime and B be true. Then A prime true implies A true since A and A prime are equivalent. Then C is true since A, B entails C. So A prime and B are true implies C true. Therefore, A prime and B entail C. And then finally, he asks the question, can we therefore say that equivalent propositions behave equivalently in arguments? And actually, I want to read Smith's actual answer to this in a second, but from the, question B star, it should be clear that simply from a structural standpoint, the answer is yes, but also no. And the also no part is what I want to refer to Smith's answer to the question here, which I brought up. Again, you can get this from his website. So he says yes and no, swapping a proposition for an equivalent one, whether as premise or conclusion, won't make a difference to the validity of an argument, but being valid is only one of the virtues we want a deductive inference to have. There are other relevant virtues, being convincing for a start, and substituting equivalence in a valid argument might not preserve such other virtues. Suppose, for example, C and C prime are equivalent, but very unobviously so. Then the inference is A, and if A, then C, hence C, and A, if A, then C, hence C prime, must both be valid, but the first can be obvious and convincing, while the second might be wildly unobvious, and so presented baldly, completely unconvincing. So I just wanted to, read that sort of clarification here uh, from Smith. Okay, so that's chapter 2. Let me stop the screen share here for a second. Um, so I'm gonna before I get back to the logic book, Bergman, I want to get up to or finish up to chapter 8 in Smith. The chapters in Smith are relatively short, so I should be able to do that, relatively quickly. The reason for that is that after chapter 8, I believe Smith starts on propositional logic, which is what chapter 2 of the logic book is on. Only there in that book he calls it sentential logic, but they mean the same thing. Um, so I want to like go through those topics in the two books at the same time. So I'm going to hold off on the logic book until I get to chapter 8 in Smith, and then we'll do them both together from there. And then also I have copy, and there's that other book whose author escapes me at the moment. I probably should have brought the book in here so I could show you, but I haven't even started on the other book, which is more similar to Copy's book than to Smith or the Logic book. But I do plan on going through that one along with the other three as well. So let me know what you guys think down below. Like I always say, give me a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel and so on. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Um, I think I have my April vlog coming up pretty soon, so keep an eye out for that. And I'll see you guys in the next video.